the BSA. You see them wearing their backpacks and hiking all the way.
Good afternoon. It's March the 3rd, 2011, and I have the privilege of interviewing today Mr. Edgar Shults Jr. This is part of a Weststar project that we have been charged with as a group to bring out of our community a person who has made a major impact as a community leader. And here I am introducing you to Mr. Edgar Shults. So, Mr. Shults, can you tell us about yourself before we launch into a detailed questionnaire on your life?
I sure can. Thank you. My name is Edgar Shults Jr. I was born in Findlay, Tennessee, December 18, 1936. I was blessed by having some of the greatest parents ever lived on the face of the earth. I know I'm a little bit prejudiced, but my dad was raised over in Missouri, and at the age 9, he always said he was given away. His mother passed away, and his daddy pawned him off to a farmer here in Tennessee. So he went to work on the farm at 9 years old. He'd only had a 3rd grade education at that time. World War II came along, and he got a job at the lumber company here in Dyersburg making caskets for the fallen soldiers. And at that time, the things were kind of rough. My mother and dad lived in a house, and they always told me we could see the chickens under the floor. And as he got through with World War II, he started doing carpenter work. And with a 3rd grade education, they didn't think he could build a house or do anything else. But he proved them wrong. And he built a large number of homes in Dyer County and became real famous as a carpenter and made plenty of money. My mother, though, fell when she was about 40 years old, off of the cabinets, polishing the cabinets, and broke her arm, her leg, her hip, and arthritis set in. And it turned out to be rheumatoid arthritis. So she was an invalid from that time until she passed away. And so I was blessed by being the only child. And everybody used to tease me that I was a spoiled little country boy. And because he always took care of me real well. And I started working with him back before I went to high school. And I found out I was not cut out to be a carpenter. In other words, driving nails over my head wasn't any fun. And up on top of the roof when it's 100 degrees, I couldn't stay up there. And so he'd always make fun of me. And so at the age of 12, I started working at Western Auto here in Dyersburg. And he was remodeling the store. And Mr. Locklear, I've had 3 fathers in my lifetime. My dad was number 1, Mr. O.B. Locklear was number 2, and Mr. Joe Ray, my scoutmaster, was number 3. And I've always looked up to all 3 of those men, and they all set good examples for me. And so I went to work for Western Auto and worked there all the time I was in high school. And when I got out of high school, he asked me would I like to stay on, so I worked there for 11 years. But I've been blessed with the things that's happened to me through the years. And I give credit to those 3 men and some others also. But Mr. Joe Ray was my scout leader. And before I got into Boy Scouts, I became a Cub Scout back at about 7 or 8 years old. So I have been a scout, I might say all my life. I've been a scout for going on 63 years. And I've been a scoutmaster for 53 years. And so I've been blessed in scouting. I enjoyed it. I always remember the first camp out I went on. My mother said, well, he's spoiled. He's never spent the night with his grandmother or anybody else. And so I don't want him to go. And my dad said, yeah. Said, let him go. Said he'll go one time and it'll burn him out. And he'll come home and won't go again. But we went down the Mississippi River and camped out on the sandbar. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard a boy scream, and I looked up, and they had him and was throwing him out in the Mississippi River with his blanket. We had no sleeping bags or tents or anything back then. So they threw him out in the Mississippi River, and he comes swimming in, pulling his blanket. And when I got home and told Mother that, oh, she went wild. And Daddy said, well, we'll see if he goes back. So I went back that next Monday night. But I want to back up just a little bit, tell you about a boy that I knew at Finley. His mother didn't want him to be a scout, but his daddy said yes. So he went to the scout meeting that Monday night, and his daddy told him, said, now after the scout meeting, it's over at 9 o'clock, you be home by 9:30, which we had to walk to and from everywhere. And so I was to walk home. Come 9:30 and I wasn't home. My dad got in his 36 Chevrolet and started looking for me. And when he pulled into the schoolyard, he saw a little boy out in the schoolyard, naked as he could be, and jumping under the basketball goal for something up there. He pulled his car in under the basketball goal, and I climbed up on top of the car and got my clothes down and put my clothes on. I got in the little car and we headed home. And Daddy said, what happened? And I told him. He said, well, I tell you what you do next Monday night. He said, when you go to Scouts next Monday night and they start chasing boys to take their clothes off, he said, you just throw up your hand and say, boys, I'll take them off myself. And he said, I'll guarantee you they'll take after somebody else. And sure enough, the next week, they started doing the same thing. And I threw up my hand and said, whoa, I'll take them off myself. And they took out after another boy and didn't even bother me the rest of the time. So that was my break into Boy Scouting. And I really enjoyed it and had a long life in the Boy Scouts until I was 18 years old as a scout. And so I had plenty of good memories of scouting and Mr. Joe Ray. We always would go camping and we'd always pull something on Mr. Ray. Now people nowadays don't remember Mr. Joe. He was a great big man, and when he spoke, he meant what he said. And he wouldn't mind going to a tree and cutting off a branch and wearing you out, or taking his belt off and wearing you out, and then look at you and say, if your daddy doesn't like that, send him up here and I'll give him the same thing. And so I never did know of anybody ever coming to Mr. Joe and being upset because he spanked their boy. When I was growing up, boys played boys' games, and they played in everybody's yard. And if we got out of line, I don't care whose house it was, they'd come out there and get on you. And they didn't mind using the belt either. And they would always say, if I get a spanking at home, I mean not at home, if I get a spanking at school, I may get one at home. Well, my daddy was the same way, only he would go out on the back porch and invite the neighbors to come over and give me one. And so discipline was a big part of this growing up. And I appreciate it today. I've seen what it will do and I've seen what it won't do. And so I always enjoy scouting. But we'd always pick on Mr. Joe, like getting his car, putting it out of gear and rolling it a mile down the road and parking it in some trees or something. And he'd have to spend the morning looking for it. And we did all kind of crazy things back then. We'd go coon hunting, rabbit hunting. We would go up in the hills and camp out. Like I said, we camped at Mississippi River on the sandbar. I wouldn't do that today even by myself, let alone with other boys in it. And so, but back then, that was part of being a boy. And so, as I came up through scouting, I learned lots of lessons. And one of them is, let boys be boys, and everything will work out okay.
You can zoom it on yourself. That'd be good. Okay. It was delightful to hear you talk about
I learned lots of lessons, and one of them is, let boys be boys, and everything will work out okay. Okay.
It was delightful to hear you talk about you becoming a scout and your early break into scouting. But I guess at some point you went through the ranks, became an Eagle Scout, and then came a fateful decision of becoming a Scoutmaster yourself. So could you please share with us what prompted you to become a Scoutmaster, and how did all that transition come about, and how things moved on from there?
Okay. After I got 18 years old, I'd already gone up through the ranks of scouting, and back when I was in the Scouts, only myself and one other boy from Finley went to Scout Camp. We were the first ones from Finley to ever go to Scout Camp at Camp McMorris in Camden, Tennessee. And we enjoyed it. And so I came back home and I went up through the ranks, and when I got 18 years old, I became assistant scoutmaster with Mr. Joe Ray at Finley. Now I better back up just a little bit because I got married in 1955. And my wife always told me there were no more fish in the pond. And so I had to go with her. And so I gave up baseball and basketball and everything else to chase girls. And the first one I chased, I caught. Because she jumped right on me as soon as I started chasing her. And she's the one who told me there were more fish in the pond. And after my boys came along, she changed her story. She'd always tell them, don't go with the first one you meet, said because there's more fish in the pond. And I don't know where all those fish came from, but she knew what she wanted, so she grabbed me. And so I got married. And at 1955, there were 3 boys drowned out at a local pond here. They were scouts on a scout camp out. And they drowned because they did what they were told not to do. They got in a boat and got out, turned the boat over, and couldn't swim. And so after that happened, Troop 88 in Dyersburg did not have a leader. It fell through after that. And so I decided I wanted to be a scout leader. So I went to the man here in town that looked after the scouting and told him I'd like to be a scoutmaster. I said, do you have a troop available? And he said, yes. He said, we got one that's been disbanded for 3 years. And he said, they're looking for a scout leader. And I said, well, I'll be glad to be one. He said, yeah, but they're Baptists. I said, so what? I'm Church of Christ. And I said, there's no two that fight anymore to each other than Church of Christ and Baptist. And I said, but I'd be glad to be their leader if they'll accept me that way. And so I met with their deacons and we had a long discussion. And I told them if they would appoint somebody to be the go-between with their church and with me, I'd be glad to take it. And so they agreed to it. And so in 1958, I started being the scoutmaster for Troop 88. And it was really a joy because I'd always enjoyed scouting, loved it. And Mr. Joe had always told me, said, we're doing it for the boys, nobody else. And at his age, he was on up in years, and he had like 60 boys down at Finley. And he said, the key to the whole thing, if you enjoy it, you'll stay with it. If you don't enjoy it, you'll get out. And so many men become scout leaders because their boys are in scouts. But that was before my boys came along. And so I started out in 1958 being the scoutmaster and thoroughly enjoyed it. We had more experiences, and I've had more fun through the years, and have seen the boys at 10, 11 years old turn into young men at 18. And now I've got boys that are Eagle Scouts and boys that are not Eagle Scouts that's 61 and 62 years old. And that really makes you feel good when you meet one of them on the street and just remember when he was 10 years old. Now I've got my wife, she's been so happy about me being the scout leader that she started back in the, 68? Might have been 62. She started a scrapbook. And we still, every year, she makes a scrapbook of the years that we've been in. So we've got them all the way up to the present time. And so she was 100% behind me. The only thing that's changed since then. Back at that time, she said, oh no, you're not going camping again. And I said, yes ma'am, we're going. Now she says, Edgar, it's time for another camp out. And so I don't know what's been the change, but she kind of encourages me to go now. Where back then she was kind of holding back on it. But I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've done things that I would never got to do in my life. And I tell the boys, you will always remember your scouting. It'll be a good memory or it'll be a bad memory. And 99% of them have good memories. Now, we have some, I always ask them, well, don't you have boys that fail? I've had very few boys that failed. I've only had, that I can think of, 4 Eagle Scouts that's ever been in any trouble that mounted anything. But those 4 learned something. And all boys, I tell their parents today at the Court of Honor, if they don't do anything but come to a scout meeting and meet for 4 or 5 years, at least they learn how to get along with anybody that comes along, because they all become buddies in Boy Scouting. And I said they will learn something, it'll benefit them, and that's what we need today is more people that will associate with each other, can get along and solve their problems. And boys are boys, but we don't want them to be boys. We want them at 4 years old to be grown men, and they're not. They need to be young boys and grow up. I can tell the boys today, go out and play, and they stand there and look at me like I'm crazy. And I say, what? They say, what do we do? What do we play? Because they don't go out and play anymore. It's got to be an organized sport, or it's got to be somebody to organize something for them. And back in our day, what was done, you went out and you invented your own games. You did things that didn't cost any money. And I'll never forget the time we went to Philmont. We was up in a primitive campground, up about 10,000 feet high, and it was getting dusky dark. And I was in my tent taking a nap, and they came and woke me up and said, Mr. Edgar, we're getting bored. And I said, well, whoopee, what about it? I said, get out there and play something. They said, play what? I said, well, let me get up. I went and found a pine cone, took the first aid kit out and wrapped it in tape. Went and found a tree, which I shouldn't have cut the limb off of the tree, but I cut the limb off of the tree and made them a bat. I said, we're going to play deck ball. They said, we never heard of deck ball. I said, you don't need but 2 decks, and that's all there is to it. You can either tag the person, or you can hit him with the ball, or you can step on the base, and he's out. And those boys started playing, and it was way after dark when they finally gave up. And I thought, now that is really something. If we just let the boys learn how to play and get along and have a good time, we've done what we're supposed to do. And so let the boys be boys. Let them learn how to play without costing mom and daddy several $100s. And so that's what we need today in our country, is more people playing and enjoying each other instead of all the stress we have. As far as being a scout leader, I did it because I enjoyed it myself, and I still enjoy it. And after I took the troop, we went on more trips. We would camp out once a month, plus all the other trips. I've been to Philmont 6 times. I've been to Sea Base 6 times. I've been to Ely, Minnesota once. I've been to South Dakota to Medicine Mountain Scout Ranch. I have been to Appalachian Trail. I floated McCoy River, no telling how many times. I've been to Cumberland Caverns about 20 some odd times. And it's just numerous things that we've done. And the boys, when I see them, they always tell me, do you remember? And I have to strain my memory to remember. But they remember the things that they've done in scouting. And I can ask them, do you remember a camp out? And they say, yeah, I remember the one where it rained all weekend. And I said, why do you remember that? And they said it was unusual. And we enjoyed it. We didn't think so then, but said we think back now, and we really enjoyed it. And so that's what it's all about, is memories. That we've all got memories. But what kind of memories do we have? Are they good ones that we're blessed with, or things that we're ashamed that we did? And so scouting will teach you the right thing to do. A scout is prepared. And there are times it comes up, it's comical. I've seen things that's happened that been real funny. And I've had times I wanted to carry a boy out behind the woods and just wear him out. But I knew I couldn't do it. But at times, they're going to be boys. We went to Huntsville, Alabama one time and had a bus load. About 40 or 50 boys on the bus. And we'd always turn them loose at the mall and let them have a good time. And one of the men, I told him, I said, you count them when they get on the bus and you count them when they got off. Well, he counted them. We met at the door at 5 minutes till 9. We counted everybody, there was one missing. And I said, where's he at? They said, we don't know. We even got the police looking for him in the mall. The stores were locking up and everything. We could not find the boy anywhere. It made us feel real good because the policeman said, well, we had a shooting in the cafeteria down there this afternoon, and said he tried to get out the door with a hostage. The first thing we thought of, there's our hostage right there. And we just didn't know what to do. And we kept wandering and looking, and it got about 10 o'clock, and we still couldn't get out of that mall. And somebody said, well, why don't you call back to the Space Center and see if by any chance he caught a taxi and went back to the Space Center. And I said, if he did, I'll kill him. And so we did, we called. The security guard answered and said, hello, and I said, do you by any chance have a Boy Scout there with you anywhere? He said, yeah, he's in bed. I said, why is he in bed? He said, I don't know. He said he was here at the Space Center, going through the Space Center by himself. So I called him. I told him, come go with me. And he said, I got him a hamburger and a cold drink. And I carried him and put him to bed. I said, you get him up. He said, no, he's asleep. I said, you wake him up. And so we got back to the Space Center. And I told the other boys to go on in and play and do what they want to do. I said, but me and him's going to have a meeting. So we got behind closed doors and we had a meeting. And I said, son, what did you do? He said, I didn't want to go to the mall. He said, I waited till y'all got on the bus. I hid behind the door. When y'all drove off, I went looking at the museum. And I said, well, I should kill you right here on the spot. And he said, well, I enjoyed it. The man fed me. He said, everything's okay. And I said, no, it's not. I said, we was over there scared to death, thought something happened to you. And I thought about it after it was over. In other words, you have to watch for boys. I got the man in there the next, and I said, you told me you counted everybody. He said, I did. And he said, it agreed. And I said, well, for some reason you counted something wrong because there was one boy missing. And I've had that happen 2 or 3 times. And, well, I wouldn't think of doing it nowadays. We used to carry them to the mall and turn them loose, say, be back at 10 till 9. They were back at 10 till 9. And you could trust them. Nowadays, we're teaching 2 new merit badges. We're going to teach hot wiring cars and shoplifting in the mall. That'll give them something that they can do when they grow up, the way things are today. So I said, I'm just joking about that, but that's the way it is. Times have changed. And used to, a man's word was his bond, and if he gave you his word, that was it. So you never had any trouble. And so that made it more pleasant to know that if you told the boys to do something, at least 99% of them was going to do it. And so it's enjoyable, but at the same time, you had your problems, and you just have to live through them. And there are times that you'll get scared to death thinking, hey, I've goofed up. But usually the parents will come to you and be on your side, and they'll usually pat you on the back and tell you you're doing a good job, whether they mean it or not. But to have 40 or 50 boys and to see them grow into young men, that's the whole purpose of it. That when you can see them and they're doctors and lawyers, and I've always told them, if your goal in life is to ride on a garbage truck, ride on the back of that garbage truck and be the best garbage man in Dyersburg. And if it's not, and if you'll do that, you might be the driver of that garbage truck a little bit later on in life. Just don't give up, but be the best you can be. Okay.
Edgar, you have been a leader for 50 plus years, and I'm sure that you've groomed many a fine man to follow in your footsteps. How do you instill leadership qualities in these men, and how do you make them see what you have seen when you became a leader? In essence, how do you transpose the values that you deeply and passionately care for in the leaders that have assisted you or that you feel will fill in your shoes in time to come?
Okay. Well, I said earlier that all boys may not be a leader, but all boys are instilled with some good parts. And all you're trying to do is develop what they've got. And one thing I've always told all the boys, and I tell them all the time, if we would keep our priorities the way they should be, and the way they should be is God first, church second, families third, work fourth, and then your other activities later. If you stick with those guidelines, you can't go wrong. And so many people do not stick with those guidelines. I know today it's not proper to say that you put God first, because everybody is debating about God, who He is, where He's at, whether He exists or not, this, that, and the other. To me, my faith is everything. And I've been told some other times that, well, you don't need to express your faith. Well, if I don't express my faith, I'm not a good Christian. I've got to express my faith. And people have got to respect me for that, because I wished everybody had a faith in God and would set those examples to our young people. Used to, If you remember back, which you can't, and most people can't, but back when Gone with the Wind came out, you could go to a movie and see any movie in town, and it was good for you. You could be relaxed. You could see it. Then they threw that one word in, Gone with the Wind. That opened up the barn door. And it's never been the same since. Now you go to TV, and we wonder why our kids are the way they are. Everywhere they look, it's things that they should not do. And so many of them won't. They won't be that way all their life. But they're tempted into doing it nowadays. We could name all sorts of things that we see today. Can't even turn your TV on where it's halfway decent. And so we're training our kids today that everything is okay. Do your thing, enjoy life, and that's all there is to it. I don't believe that. And my faith stands out to the point that I put God first, and everything else will fall in line. And if you've got a Christian family, the chances you're going to turn out to be a good person and have a happy life. And I work with people. I was working with a person today that's in a divorce case. And they wanted me to take some old videos and put them together so they could use them in their divorce case. And after I looked at that, I thought, boy, some people live some miserable lives, don't they? In other words, life to them, it's just a rat race. And it's a turmoil all the time. The husband and wife fussing, the kids hearing it. They see everything going on around them. And then we're supposed to have good children. The thing about it is, if we set the proper examples, we need to realize that our kids are watching them. We had now, everybody disagrees with me on this. That's okay. I drove around town for months with signs on my car. Vote against liquor by the drink. And I had a picture that I tried to put in the paper. They wouldn't put it in. But it showed Mom and Daddy standing up drinking in front of the kids, and the little kids standing looking up at them. And I thought, now how in the world can any parent stand up and say, that's okay? And then when their kid gets in trouble, they want to blame somebody else. If you notice today, the cold-blooded killer can kill someone, and they go back to his genes. Now I always tease everybody, I hadn't worn jeans in years. But all they want to do is go back to the genes and find out somewhere way back yonder, that's what caused him to do that today. That's a crock, I'll tell you. It beats all of it. That if the people were raised right, if they were taught right, and they were in the right groups, they wouldn't have to worry about stuff like that. I've always associated myself with as good a people as I can find, and I don't have to worry about all these things that we see going on, because the people I run with don't do things like that. And so we have to do that. We have to sort our friends out, and I tell our young people here at church all the time, your friends right now, and when you finish high school, you won't hardly remember the friends you had in high school, because you'll pick up new friends at college, or you'll go off to the military, and so you'll have new friends. And I was in the Navy. I couldn't tell you 20 of the men I was in the Navy with, unless I get the pictures out and look at them. They were our friends, but we've changed friends now. We got different groups. So life is changing all the time, and I feel like, and I'm sold on Boy Scouting, I feel like for our young men, Boy Scouting really helps. And I know everybody disagrees with me on this, but Brody Couples myself says if all of our young people had to go to the military for 1 year, our society would be better. At least they're taught discipline, and that's what we need, is some discipline. All right.
Mr. Shults, you had indicated that you were in the Navy for a while. Has your service in the Navy influenced the way you have looked at Boy Scouts? And if so, what was the greatest leadership decision that you had to make? And followed up with, where do great ideas come from, if you will?
Okay. In other words, my Navy career I was blessed just like I've been all my life. At the end of the Korean conflict just was over. and I was in the 11th grade in high school. And so I joined the Naval Air Reserve at Millington. And I had no idea, but I always wanted to be in the military. So I joined in the 11th grade. And by that, I had to go down once a month for drill and 2 weeks cruise. So I had a little Navy that is enough to please me. I ended up staying there for 11 years in the Naval Air Reserve. And I just go down 1 weekend a month and then 2 weeks in the summer for drills. And they didn't want me for any more. Back then, they didn't call out the National Guard or the reserves for any active duty unless when Vietnam came along, then they did. But I was out by that time. And so I was real lucky. I missed it all. But I did pick up some real good points. Number one, the Navy helped me realize what it meant to be on time. Today, that's out of the question. You ask people today, we're going to leave at 7 o'clock, and you be there at 15 till, they'll get there 15 after. And I have had them to come an hour and something late, and we would sit there and wait on them. Then we made the point and say, we're going to leave at 7 o'clock. If you're not there, you chase us down. And so today, it taught me in the Navy to be on time. It taught me the responsibility. They would give you an order and you better do it or you're in trouble. And so the Navy taught me lots of things, plus going to school and studying what they wanted me to take. They wanted me to be a jet engineer, a jet mechanic, which I didn't even know which end of the plane was the engine in. And so I enjoyed that. And so I thoroughly enjoyed the Naval Reserve. And I learned lots of things from it. The one thing I learned from it, and I started to go active duty several times, but my religion came up on me each time. I did not want to be around a bunch of people that cursed all the time. And for some reason, in the Navy back then, you had to have a cup of coffee in your hand and cuss somebody out, or you was nobody. And I just was not for that. And even after I got out of the Naval Reserve, or while I was in, we used to go down once a year to the Navy base and carry the scout troop. And we would sit there and listen at some chief petty officer chewing out some poor little old boy. And I said, you mean I put up with that stuff all this time? But the thing I got from it was this. In other words, you've got to do things you don't like, and you got to make the best of it. And so when I was in the Navy, religion come out again. They said, you can't get off to go to church. I believed them until I went and talked to my commanding officer. I told him, I said, I go to church every Sunday from 10 till 12. He said, I can't sign your papers that you can do that. I said, I'm sorry. I said, when I come up for re-enlistment, I will not re-enlist. And so he said, well, let's do this. You disappear from 9:30 till 12:30, and I won't say anything about it. And he said, nobody else will either. I said, okay. So I went into Millington. Every Sunday I was down there and went to church. And then I would drive back home after the drill that Sunday afternoon and go to church here in town. And I told them, I said, don't take what people say. Stand your ground. And in most cases it'll work out. But if it doesn't, you haven't lost. You still gain because you let the person know how you feel about it. And the part about great ideas and doing things like that, you get those, and your ambitions, you get them from the people you're around. I mentioned the three men that I felt as my dads. My daddy instilled in me my family, because he and my mother, they were nothing as far as religion when they met and married. Then they became Christians. And I never did ask them, are we going to church? And he used to joke about it. Say, why didn't you ever ask us if we were going to church? I said, I knew better. I knew we were going. And I knew if you went, I went. So there's no question about it. So he set that in me. And then when it come to Mr. Joe Ray, he was very stiff and disciplined. I was riding my bike one day going home after school. And the traffic, back then it was the highest grade in school was our traffic cops. And he pulled me over and said, "You're riding on the wrong side of the street." And I said, "No, sir, I'm not." He said, "Yes, you are." And I said, "No, I'm not." So he wrote me up. Next morning, Mr. Joe called me to his office. He said, "Edgar, I understand you was on the wrong side of the road riding your bike." I said, "No, sir, I wasn't." He said, "Well, the guard said you was." I said, "I don't care what he said." I said, "I wasn't." He said, "Well, I tell you what, I got to go see the 8th grade just a minute." He said, "Time I'm gone and get back," he said, "you look up or you find a place that you can prove you was riding on the right side of the road." I said, "Okay." So I got the encyclopedia out, started looking. He came back. He said, "Well, do I spank you or do you tell me were you right?" I said, "I was right." He said, "Well, prove it to me." And I told him the encyclopedia. I said, "On any bicycle, motor vehicle, anything else, you ride in direction of the flow of the traffic." I said, "But on bicycles, most people like to face the traffic." And I said, "That's wrong. You go with the flow of traffic." He said, "Well, I knew that, but I just want to see if you could prove it to me." And I said, "Well, when you threatened me with that belt, I knew I was going to prove it to you." And he laughed and went on. So many times people guide us in the right directions and set our goals for us. And then Mr. Locklear, I worked for him for 11 years. I never saw the man mad at anybody. He would get mad, but I never saw him let anybody know he was mad. And I worked with him for 11 years, and one day, right before Christmas, we had 150 bicycles lined up that had been bought during cotton picking time that the kids would get during Christmas. And I went to reach for a light, to turn off the light, and it had a string hanging down over the bikes to pull. Well, I pulled that string, and when I did, I stepped into the bikes, and 150 bicycles turned over. And he was standing at the other end. He just shook his head, turned around and walked out. Didn't say a word. So he knew that I'd have to stay there until I got them all set back up, and I did. And then I saw one day when a man came in the front door of Western Auto cussing. He cussed every salesman we had. He went back to the office and cussed 3 of the ladies that worked in the office. And Mr. Locklear was sitting in his office, and he said, "What's going on out there?" One of the men said, "We got a very irate customer out here." So he got up from behind his desk, walked out there, and first thing he said, "Hey there, how are you today? It's a great day, ain't it?" And the man looked at him, started cussing. Mr. Locklear said, "Well, it's just a great day." He said, "I didn't know you felt that bad about it." And you might not believe it, but before the man went out there, he went to everybody in the store, shook their hand, and apologized for the way he conducted himself. He went out the door, and Mr. Locklear was standing there. And he said, "Y'all take over from here. I'm going home and take some Maalox." And so he went out the back door and went home and took Maalox. But he proved to me that you can melt a heart if you just try. We were out at Philmont Scout Ranch and went to a laundromat. Carried all the boys in, about 30 of them, to do their laundry. And it was early in the morning. This elderly lady came down the steps. She lived upstairs. And everything we did was wrong. Boy, she was sour on the world. And we had a man with us, and he told me, he said, "Watch me melt that old woman." And I said, "What you gonna do?" He said, "Just watch me." He did the same thing. He walked over and said, "Good morning, how are you? Ain't it beautiful today?" And before we left there, he was sitting down beside her in a chair, talking, and they were laughing and having the best time, and she never did get on the boy after that. It just worked out fine. But you've got to take the first step. You've got to go out and stick that hand out and make the first approach. I tell the boys, and parents too, and everybody might disagree with this. I could care less at my age. But the thing about it, we've scared our boys in the world, and I shouldn't say this because somebody will write me up, but we scared them to death over homosexuals. This right here is my territory. And I tell the boys, why are you worried or scared of anybody? This is your territory. And when they get in that line there, and if they violate your territory, sock them in the nose. If you don't want to do that, talk them out of it. I said, I've been on this earth all these years, now as far as I know, I've never had a fight. I'm a chicken, I got back trouble, and that's a yellow streak down my back. And I said, what it is, I talk my way out of it. And if you can't do that, there's something wrong with you. You should be able to talk your way out of anything that comes along and you should be able to handle anything that comes along. So don't be scared. Face it and go on with it. And so that is kind of part of life. You got to face everything that comes along. And I've had so much experience with boys. And you know, it's very seldom we have a boy that ever gets in a fight or has any problem at scout meeting. I was trying to think one time if we'd ever had really a fight. We've broke them up several times. But I'll never forget a little boy out at Philmont. We had a whole line of boys hiking the Philmont Trail. Had our packs on, and everything was going great. It was going up pretty high on a mountain with a pretty steep incline. And all of a sudden I saw this little boy trip and fall, roll down the mountain. He hit a tree down there, it didn't hurt him. We run down there to see if it killed him. He got up and he was okay. And I said, "What happened, you tripped?" "No, that idiot behind me tripped me because I stepped on his heel." And I said, "Well, what did you do?" He said, "I rolled down the hill." And I said, "Well, what do you think about that?" He said, "Well, I shouldn't have stepped on his heel a while ago." And so I got a big kick out of it. Because so many times the things that we take, it's back there to us. It comes back to us, so we need to laugh. And we go around town. People blow their horns at you and call your mother names. They don't even know my mother, but they're calling your mother something. And I said, "You can get mad at that. You could shoot them. But why do that? Why not just wave at them and smile and keep on going?" I said, "Just make the best of it instead of always wanting to fight or always wanting to take revenge at somebody." And so it'll all work out if we just stick with it. Okay.
Mr. Shults, thank you for your insight, your philosophy, and the way you have looked at life. Over these years, you have acquired wisdom, experience that can't be learned but the hard way. And so I pose you a hypothetical question. Knowing what you know, if you were to live your life again, would you do a few things different?
I would imagine I'd do lots of things different, but I'm happy with what I've done. And I know that one thing, I went to college and tried to get a degree. But my wife caught me when that pond only had a few fish in it. And she caught me and we got married at 18 years old. When we started out, I was making $30 a week, and that was for 6 days a week. She was making $30 a week. And once they found out I was getting married, they raised me to $35 a week. With that $35 of mine and $30 for her, I bought a new car. We built our home. We've lived in it for 55 years. And we made it fine. We would have to charge our groceries at a little store up the street. And when I got paid or she got paid, we'd go by and pay our grocery bill. Times were different, completely different. And we used to go when you went to get a job, that's exactly what you went for, to get a job. And you meant to work for that job. Today, people go get a job, they don't mean a job. I want a paycheck. And if it's not what I agreed to, I'll fuss. If the man next to me is getting more than I'm getting, I ain't a fuss. But the Bible tells us, be content with what we've got. And so times have changed so much. I'm sure there's lots of things that I would change. As far as church, no, I would not change. As far as marriage, no, I would not change. I couldn't have found a better woman. I tease her all the time, though. I said I wouldn't sell you for $1 million. But if that man comes by with the one-legged billy goat, you're gone. And I tease her all the time, and she's used to it. I made a talk one time at a meeting, had a bunch of people there, and I picked on her the whole meeting. And we happened to be in different cars that night. And when it was over, they said, "We understand why y'all don't travel together." And I said, "Just ask her." I said, "She can answer every one of those things because she's heard them all of her life." And so I wouldn't change that. I was blessed by getting in the Navy the way I did, because I got a taste of military life, but at the same time I wasn't tied down to it. I was blessed by having a job. I mentioned a while ago I started with Western Auto back when I was 12 years old, 12 or 13. But that doesn't mean that's when I started to work. I worked on the farm back when I was probably 9 or 10 years old, riding a combine, picking cotton, doing things like that. And then I went for one summer, till my daddy burnt me out. I worked one summer as a carpenter, and so I don't think I'd have changed any of that because all of it was a learning experience for me. And then I was blessed when I got the job with Colonial Rubber Works. I stayed with them 30 years. When I asked to be retired, they said, retired from what? I said, what do you mean? They said, well, you hadn't worked in 30 years, so why are you retiring? And so I was blessed with that. And since I've been blessed with retirement, I retired when I was 58 years old. And I've had church, family, scouts. I've stayed busy as a beaver with all of them. And that's what it takes. I told a person this morning, I was out walking, I told a person, they said, well, I'm fixing to retire pretty soon. I said, don't retire unless you've got something to do. You've got to stay busy. If you don't, you'll regret it because you'll sit around the house, watch TV, and get old and gray. So you got to stay in there. So it's, I don't know if things I would have really changed, and I'm just thankful I've had the life I've had. And one thing, I'm falling apart now. Every time I go to the doctor, they give me another pill or send me to another doctor. But at 74 years old, I'm blessed. I tell them every morning I get up, I go to the mirror, look in it. I look at that ugly creature sitting across from me, but at the same time, I know I'm alive, and that's the main thing. I know we've all heard the story of the men that went to the funeral home, and they were standing there talking. The first one looked and said, what do you want people to say about you when you're dead and gone? He said, well, I hope they say I was a good person, had a good family, and everything was great. He looked up and said, well, what do you want them to say about you? He said, I want them to say I was a Christian, I had a good home, had a good life. He said, that's great. He looked up and said, what do you want them to say about you? He said, I want them to look over in that casket and say, hey, this man is still breathing. And so we need to realize that it could be worse. I mentioned earlier, my mother was an invalid from age 40 until 60-something. You even had to use a hydraulic lift to lift her up to change the linen. And so she was always a very jolly person, a person that everybody felt good when they left to see her. They felt better than she did. And she was just a person that would not look at the bad things. And so we need to be that way. We need to always look. And as far as changing, I'm changing every day. But the reason why I'm changing is because of old age. And I told them years ago that I hope when I kick out, I'm going down the trail with a pack on my back. But I'm too old now to even carry the pack, so we'll do it some way.
Mr. Shults, we are very grateful to you for sparing this valuable afternoon to us, telling us about your life, your experiences, and the impact you've had in the community. But I'd like to hear from you in terms of in what ways do you think you have touched our community? And a follow-up question as to how would you like to be remembered 30, 40, 50 years from now when a young Boy Scout or a middle-aged person like myself would look at this tape and say, what a way to live a life.
Well, let me say the first thing about it is, over the years, if it hadn't been for the men that's helped me as scout leaders and assistant scout leaders, I've always been blessed with them. When I started out, I had 3 boys that came from the old troop. And in a short time, maybe in a year's time, I had 30 boys, and I was by myself. And then I had one of the dads come forward just to visit one Monday night, and he became assistant scoutmaster. Then a short time later, another man came just to visit, and he became a scout leader. And both of them made the statement, we didn't have the nerve to walk away from you up there with 30 boys. And so I have been blessed all these years having good leaders and good men in the community that help. And as far as the future goes, That's the key to it, is having the right men that will work with the boys. Now, I was asked about our Eagle Scouts. We've had 188 Eagle Scouts in our troop. And the thing about it is this, I did not do that. I was more or less the background man that saw to it and organized it and got the men to help. And the men are the ones that really got in there and fought with the boys and did the things that they needed to do. As far as the future comes and what will people think, I hope the boys will always remember something good. I ran into a boy on the streets here the other day, and I would imagine he's 45 now. And this little boy, when he was in Scouts, a judge called me and said, "Don't take him in Scouts." A school teacher called and said, "Don't take him." And then I had a school teacher from another school call me and said, "Don't take him," because he'd been transferred to her school. I said, I have never turned a boy down in all these years, and I'm not going to start now. Well, that was a mistake. The little boy came, his mother was on dope, his daddy was an alcoholic. They lived in a filthy trailer. It was pitiful. And he was pitiful. And the boys declared war on him right off the bat, because they had already been told by their parents and everybody else that he was no good. And so the little boy came into our troop. We had to take him under our wing and do everything for him. And so I ran into him on the street, and he is a grown man now. And he said, "Mr. Edgar, you don't remember me, do you?" I said, "Sure I do. Who are you?" And he told me his name. I said, "Wait, you lived over on such and such street in a trailer house." He said, "That's right." He said, "I want to thank you for being my scout leader." And he said, "I turned out okay." And he said, "Here are my 3 kids." And he said, "I'm working at one of the factories here in town." And he said, "Everything is great." And I'm about to cry now. But he said, "I'll always remember that." He said, "I always remember the days that somebody cared for me." And I thought, well, it was worthwhile. And we have so many young boys out there that don't have parents. You may say, well, they got them. Sure, they got them. But they don't deserve them. And anything we can do to help a young man, it'll come back to pay for itself. And we got boys all over Dyersburg. It's no telling how many hundreds, thousands we've had in our scout troop. And like I say, I run into them all the time, and they ask me the same thing. "Do you know me?" And I say, "Sure I do. Who are you?" And they have to tell me. I've got one boy I can think of right here in town. We went to Shiloh back in the '62, I believe it was. He's a little short, fat boy back then. When I say fat, he was fat. We took a 16-mile hike. 92 degrees that day, and we were hiking. Back then the roads were gravel. We were hiking on gravel. And he got galled, and he was walking spraddle-legged like a duck. And I went to him and I said, "Son, you need to go back to camp and lay down and put some powder on your legs." "No, sir, these boys will make fun of me." I said, "Well, who cares?" I said, you're hurting." "Yes, sir, but I mean make it." We went on to about dinner time, and we stopped, and I saw him over there taking his shoe off. And he had a blister on his ankle that was hanging over his shoe, almost touching the ground. So we took a needle and match, and well, before we did that, we asked him, "Let's get you back to camp and let one of the men help take care of you." "No, sir." We said, "You've got to." "No, sir." And so we took a needle, burnt the end of it, lanced or let the pus out of it, and he said, "I'm going to make it." Well, he did. He would not give up. And he told me, he said, "The boys will make fun of me, and I am not quitting." And he did. And the boy lives here in town now, and he's 62 years old. And I tease him about that all the time. He said, "I was miserable, but he said, I wanted to quit, but my mind kept telling me to go on." And that's what it's all about, just sticking with it. And we had a little boy, he was a doctor's son, down at Memphis taking a 16-mile hike. And he sat down on the curb and said, "I'm not going any further." I said, "Son, the bus is not here. You got to go to the bus." "No, sir, I'm not moving from here." I said, "Okay." I said, "When we go around that corner up yonder," I said, "the bus is probably about 4 more miles. You got to make it." "No, sir, I'm going to sit right here. You can pick me up." I said, "No, we don't pick you up." I said, "You go to the bus." We walked off and left him. I told him in. I said, "Now let's go to the corner up there and we'll turn the corner. He'll think we're gone." And I said, "We'll stop and see if he comes on. If he don't, we'll come back out and do what we have to." We turned the corner and stood there a little bit. And we heard footprints. Boy, they were flying. He come around that corner just flying, crying. And he saw us, his eyes got great big and got a big smile on his face. He said, "I thought y'all had left me." I said, "No, but see, you can make it." He said, "Yes, sir, I did." And so he was real good. And then I had a doctor's son. Went to scout camp. We was sitting on the porch after supper on Sunday afternoon. And he sat there and he said, "Mr. Shults, I want to go home." And I said, "Son, you can't go home." He said, "My daddy told me that if I wanted to go home, you would bring me home." I said, "Son, do you see your daddy anywhere around here?" He said, "No, sir." I said, "That's right." I said, "I'm your daddy this week." I said, "So I don't want to hear any more about you going home." I never did hear another word out of him for the whole week. And that young man was my first Eagle Scout that made Eagle. So, in other words, that was what is my goal, is to have these boys to have something good to say about scouting and the men that's helped them through scouting, that it made a difference in them. And I'll assure you, they may not remember what you want them to remember, but they'll remember something about scouting. And I think that would be my legacy. And it is today, one of them coming up and say, "Do you know me?" And that lets me know that, hey, they were once my scout. The mailman that pulled in out here this morning, well, this afternoon when I was sitting up the camera, he pulled up and he hollered the same thing. "Do you remember me?" I said, "Sure I do. Who are you?" He gave me his name. He said, "I was in your scouts." He said, "I'm 40 years old, so I really appreciate it and I enjoy scouting." So he drove off. And right now I couldn't tell you his name, but he gave me his name. And that goes with old age too. But that's the thing that you look forward to, just being somebody will know that you were here. And when you're dead and gone, somebody else will take your place and go on with it. I've got one boy that was an outstanding scout. He's been a scoutmaster in Germany. He was in the Air Force, and every base he went to, he set up a scout troop and worked with them. I've got one up on the other side of Nashville that's been a scout leader now for about 40 years. And he was one of my Eagle Scouts. And so you run into them all over. Dyersburg is full of Eagle Scouts. And if I call names, you would know most of them. But they're all over Dyersburg. And I'm proud of all of them. And that's just life. And so I just hope they have good memories. And I'm sure that some parents is going to whip me, but I think the boys appreciate what they've learned in scouting.
Edgar, I'm very grateful to you for spending this delightful afternoon with me and telling us all about yourself, your service to the community. I hope that in years to come, those that follow will cherish this interesting dialogue we've enjoyed this afternoon. On behalf of the community of Dyersburg, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your incredible contribution to our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.